Okay, our final video, we're going to look at the comparisons between um, um, big cities and how they budget. So just to start with, in the 100 largest cities in the U.S., they average $2,600 of spending per resident in a budget of averaging $2.2 billion. Um, Compare this with the states in which these cities reside are located that have an average budget each of $79.5 billion. So um, you can see that even in the largest cities, um, the city budgets are dwarfed by the state level budgets. Um, Another thing to look at is compare the spending per resident in cities versus the city spending per resident in states. Cities again spend $2,600 per resident, and states spend about $5,200 per resident. So the bulk of the funding is coming from, 2/3 of the funding that gets spent in our local communities is spent by the state and not by the city government. Um, we can then look at, how big cities compare, and it's better to do this on a per resident basis than on an absolute basis because Los Angeles and New York are much bigger than the cities further down on the list. Um, so $2,600 is the average, but it's not what's being spent in every city. So Colorado Springs is the spends the least amount per resident of any of the top 100 cities. They spend $566 per resident. The upper end is a little more challenging though because of structure of government. So DC spends the most per resident of any city in the country at over $15,000. Is important to realize about DC is not that they're just prolific spenders, but that the city is providing all of the services of the city, state, and county levels of government. They're doing, everything in DC is run by the DC through the DC budget. San Francisco is the next biggest, and they're in a similar situation. They spend about $9,500 per resident. But again, you're looking at a city that's both a city and a county. There's no separate city and county government in San Francisco. And so they're providing both city and county level services. So then when you look at the number 3 city, you start to get into the cities that are only providing city level services, and that is Seattle spends the most per resident at about $6,400. So even when you compare when you compare something like Colorado Springs, to the average of $2,700, they're spending about a fifth of what the average city spends per resident. If you compare them to Seattle, which is a comparable city in terms of their responsibilities. They're spending about 10% of what the largest city is spending per resident. Then, if you look at it in comparison to like DC, which isn't a completely fair comparison, they're spending about 3% DC is spending per resident. Let's take a look at how that plays out in two similar cities, Birmingham, Alabama, and Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Um, they both have populations in the low 200,000, Alabama 212, Louisiana 229,000, but they have vastly different budgets. So Birmingham's city budget was 389 million, and Baton Rouge's was 819 million. Now, it's very important to realize how much these cities have in common. They're both run by Democratic mayors and city councils in states that are Republican controlled. They're both southern cities, and they are less than 300 miles away from each other. So what makes the difference? Part of it is culture, and part of it is structural. So Louisiana, in general, has had more open understanding of a social safety net than Alabama has. If you go back to the boss era, Huey Long was one of the major bosses. He got his support through various patronage projects, and so Louisiana itself has a culture of being willing to spend more money on municipal kinds of projects. Alabama, on the other hand, is one of the most conservative states in terms of don't don't tax me and don't provide me any services. So they are operating within a larger kind of state framework of ideas about spending. So that's the cultural side. The structural side, though, is services and expectations. So when we look at the kinds of services cities are responsible for providing in Alabama and the kinds of services that cities are responsible for providing in Louisiana, you're going to find some differences in that. You're also going to see some differences in the allowances. Are they allowed to raise their tax rate? Are they permitted to charge fees and things like that? So you get some kind of things imposed from the state level government that are structural, and then you have some things from culture, from political culture that influence the political decisions being made by the city council. So that's just kind of an apples to apples comparison. Um, a couple of final wrap up notes. On Tuesday, I'm going to be having a voluntary and a strictly voluntary Zoom meeting at 11:30 on Tuesday. You can come, you can get questions answered, you can talk about any of the issues, you can get advice, you can get support, you can bring me problems, anything like that. But again, it is voluntary, and I just thought I would open it up. And tomorrow, you will get your coronavirus update as it applies to cities and counties. I mean, as it applies to states, how states are responding, and that'll be helpful for your final exam. So I will see you on Tuesday in either in video form or in Zoom form. Thanks a lot.